Hello, everyone. This is Wilson Cole, and I'm president of Adams, Evans, and Ross, and senior partner of ELOC Global. And I am joined for this Monday morning meeting with my lovely daughter and general counsel, Samantha Cole. Hey, Sam, how are you doing?
I am doing great. How are you?
Doing fine, doing fine. Samantha, we're going to kind of put on a different hat today because there's companies that I know, some of them are clients, and some of them are debtors that have actually paid, but they find themselves where they've dug a hole. And I occasionally will get a call from a client that says, Wilson, this is incredibly embarrassing, but recently in the last couple of years got divorced, and just between the money and everything else, now I find myself in need of someone to help me get out of debt. And, companies wind up running into debt for a number of reasons. One is they can lose a major client. One is they can just misjudge cash flow. But they find themselves owing vendor debt that they cannot pay. They find themselves holding, credit card, because in small businesses, it's not like small businesses have a $150,000 credit line with Wells Fargo. They typically have 2 or 3 credit cards with $10,000 limits, and they use those credit cards to finance their business. And we get in companies that just have gotten lopsided. They owe $100,000, they owe $500,000, whatever it is. And over the last 30 years, I probably have turned around about 25 or 30 companies, and half of those have been our clients. And we just a couple of months ago were able to take one of our clients that owed Citibank $22,000. We were able to negotiate it down to $2,000. And if there's a company out there right now that's watching this video and they find themselves in the awkward position of owing more money than they can pay, and it does happen, especially in this economic climate, there's a process that we as a collection agency would follow. There's typically a process that the attorneys follow. And I want to take a couple of minutes just to kind of break that down for the listeners. If you find yourself with let's take vendor credit first, and we may have to do another session where we break down on credit cards. But let's say I owe a vendor and, I owe them $10,000. I can't pay them. They're now 60, 90 days behind. My first recommendation would be to call them, see if you can break it out $1,000 a month, something along those lines, if it is a short-term cash flow issue. If it's more systemic, then, try to negotiate it down. That way they get something, you don't have to file bankruptcy and all of that. But what typically happens is that client and the debtor, for whatever reason, cannot agree, and so it comes to us. The process that we utilize is it's about a 30 to 45-day process. It's going to include, us reaching out to them, the stereotypical debtor letters, and we are trying to find a way to resolve it with that client. And then it comes to you, and you'll make a final demand before it goes to the attorney. That's about somewhere between a 4 to 6 week period. Once it leaves our office and we send it out to an attorney, Sam, kind of give a timeline and an overview of what happens once it goes legal and where that starts becoming a problem for the debtor.
Well, it starts off with, we'll send it out. The attorney has to do their due diligence, make sure there's not a conflict of interest. They'll research, make sure they have the correct name from the Secretary of State so that they're suing the right person, because you'd be amazed at the amount of times that can get complicated of, were you dealing with ABC or ABCD Inc. and things along those lines. Depending on the attorney we work with and the relationship we have with that attorney, and also local state rules, the attorney will send a demand letter that they have to, give 30 days or things along those lines to resolve it. After that, if there's, a response, they try to work it out. If not, it then is, suits filed that they'll email me and get with the request, or somebody in my office with the request for cost, and we'll send all of the documentation they need, affidavits. Suit will get filed, and then it is a series of painstaking 30 to 45 day increments of this filing or that filing until you're sitting waiting for a court date. And we're in the middle, while this is being filmed, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. If we don't have a court date, there are no predictions. That's just going to be my soapbox for the day. Once we have a court date, and usually even once they get served and start realizing they're going to have to get an attorney to answer and things like that, you start getting a lot of movement of everybody becomes much more resolve focused, and it happens again. I think the 30 days between when they're served and when they have to answer, you've got a great chance of settlement. And then I think the 2 weeks leading to trial, you have a great chance of settlement.
I agree with you, but from a debtor perspective, a lot of times where debtors, and this just happened with us, where a debtor got served, they did not answer. We're in the process of getting a judgment. Now, once we get a judgment, depending on the state, we can go pull that money out of the account. It's not, if they get served, they do not want to ignore that lawsuit, because a lot of people say, oh, I'll worry about it in 12 months. There's certain checks that they have to complete, or the creditor winds up getting that judgment. We get a judgment all the time before we ever reach court. And one of my favorites are, if a debtor is a company, and there typically is who we're only going to deal with, and the owner tries to file a response in most states, that response, even though it may be a perfect response, if it was not filed by an attorney, and this is why everybody hates attorneys, Sam,
rules.
they create the rules. If you file an answer that was not followed by the attorney, the litigating attorney, which would be, in most cases, our attorney, would get that set aside. So there's some danger, there's some opportunity. If you find yourself where you haven't been able to negotiate with the creditor to get it resolved, you haven't been able to negotiate or get it resolved with the collection agency, by the time it gets to the attorney, it can still get resolved. But there's certain things that you have to make sure that you do, because if you get served and you think, well, I got 12 months beforehand. No, if you don't file the answer, or if you don't file an answer in the correct way, the creditor gets to
or if they file suit in a different state.
Yes.
Do not think that you are immune to it, especially if you bank with a national bank.
Well, and what what Samantha's saying there is, if they sue you, if you're in California, they sue you in Texas, and you think, well, it's not a problem, I don't have any assets in Texas. If you deal with a national bank of Wells Fargo, Bank of America, or something along those lines, your bank account just became attachable. Secondly, even if they have to domesticate that judgment, if you get a judgment in the state of Texas and you take it to California, they do have to sue you, but they don't have to prove that you owe it. They just have to prove, in most cases, that the judgment was acquired legally in the state of Texas. You don't necessarily have to open up and argue. Your attorney can try to do that, but that becomes much more expensive than if you would have just defended it to begin with. So, Sam, if a company is, from a debtor perspective, if a company that we're dealing with, trying to turn them around, one of our clients is behind, hopefully we're going to get it, in most of the time, I'd say 85% of the time, we're going to get it resolved before there's ever a suit. Occasionally, we'll get a client of ours that says, I was sued, now I'm fighting litigation. If somebody were sued already, and they're waiting on a lawsuit, what would be the process? Is that something that you could call the other attorney to try to get it resolved?
Once suit's filed, I could call some of our forwarding attorneys and say, hey, is this something you can handle? But at that point, it is a defense matter, so it cannot be handled on a contingency.
Yep.
So, meaning you will be paying an hourly rate to answer it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in that state. So it's in the courts of that state. If an attorney sends a letter to you and it's just a letter, I can pick up the phone call, say, hey, we usually handle this for this stuff as a courtesy. I'm picking up the phone, see if we can find some common ground. But once a suit has been filed, local counsel is needed.
Okay. So the key ingredient there, and we're going to kind of take some of these, we're doing vendor credit right now. And these are other small businesses that you may have borrowed, or you've gotten product or services from and you can't pay. We're going to discuss, maybe next time we'll discuss credit cards, because credit cards, there's some good things about credit cards on negotiating down. There's some debt, there's some bad things. But the key to vendor credit is you would want to get a company trying to negotiate on your behalf somewhere around, in my opinion, that 60 to 90 day mark before it escalates up. Because if we catch it with the vendor, we can typically negotiate it down for you. If it's already gone legal and prior to suit, we can typically negotiate it down for you. If they have already filed suit and it's legal, then unfortunately we can probably give you some help, but it's not going to be on a contingency basis. If you find yourself where you find yourself now to where you cannot pay your bills, you can give us a call. And the way that we work is it's almost like reverse collections. We'll charge you 20% of whatever we're able to save you. So if you owe a $10,000 bill and we're able to negotiate it down to $2,000 and get you a release, then you would pay 20% of that savings, or in that example, 20% of the $8,000. You can reach me at wilson@aercollections.com, or you can call me at 800-452-5287. I'm at extension 6578. Samantha, before we jump off and end this recording, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I think one thing that, just because I've seen it happen in other economic slowdowns, is as you start getting vendor invoices in, double check all of them before you say anything. Because if you say you owe it, even if it's too old and you wouldn't owe it, or there's something incorrect in it, once you say you owe it, it is as solid as if it was true as can be.
Or if it's very old and that's a good point, or you make a payment, all of a sudden you took something that was no longer a legal debt and you reactivated it. And that's a very good point. So if, everybody wants to do the right thing, and I'm all for doing the right thing. Every debtor that's come in here that we worked with, we force them to do the right thing and help guide them, should probably be a better analogy. But if you find yourself where you owe $50,000 and there's no way you're going to be able to ever pay more than $20,000, I can tell you from dealing with creditors for the last 30 years, creditors would much rather have $20,000 versus nothing. And if you don't solve the problem, then you wind up going out of business or bankrupt, and that's not a good thing to be. But if you were trying to negotiate on your own behalf, there are some wordings, and this is yet again why people hate attorneys. If you say, yeah, I know I owe it, even if there was a defense on why you didn't know it, just waived a lot of that right, if not all of that right. Sam, I appreciate that input. Join us next week. We're going to kind of do a series of these. And let me just say this. If you're a legitimate company, and all of our clients are, and you just find yourself in an awkward position, give me a call. If you're looking to scam the system, it's not something that I'm going to help you with. But most folks I have seen, even with the debtors that we've worked with, 96% of the folks that come through here are good companies, good folks. They just misjudge cash flow. If you find yourself now in that awkward position, we will help you negotiate down those debts so you can fight another day. Sam, I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you next week, and we'll discuss credit cards and how that plays into it, because there's some uniqueness that we want to discuss on that as well.
Sounds good. See you next week.